Let's open up to Matthew chapter 8 as we continue our study through what I'm calling When Heaven Touches Earth. The things that happened in the life of Jesus following his words in the Sermon on the Mount, or at least how Matthew records them. And as a recap, I want to just look at what we talked about last week. I don't think last week got recorded, so if you weren't here, I'm going to give you a short recap, and you'll get a chance to kind of hear the essence of what that was about. We started in chapter 8 with the account of Jesus cleansing the leper. And the leper came to Jesus and worshiped him and begged him to heal him of his leprosy, saying, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." And we talked about how this man acknowledged Jesus' ability to heal him, but also yielded to his will. I think this is a really important point, and that's why I pointed it out. I'm pointing it out again. The leper knew Jesus had the power to heal him, and yet he yielded to the will of God in humility, also recognizing that Jesus may have other plans that don't involve his healing. That's a hard thing to hear when you're suffering. And yet, when we honestly look at the scriptures and the world around us, we see continual suffering, and God has a plan. He has not forsaken you. God does have a plan in that. And so it's worth noting that even Jesus himself, when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, just moments before being mocked, beaten, tortured, and crucified, prayed to the Father and said, "Father, if this cup could pass from me," that's what I would want. I don't want to go through with this. "Nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done," he said. If it has to be this way, I'm yielded to your will. So it's something to wrestle with, something to keep in our minds. But as this story goes, it's an amazing show of this leper's faith. How many of us would be content to remain in the state of isolation, pain, and sorrow if that's God's will? He's been ostracized from the community. He's ceremonially and culturally unclean. He can't be around people. He has to cry out saying, "Unclean, unclean." And yet he says, "I would love it if you could heal me. I know you can heal me. If it's your will, you can make me clean." Maybe it's not your will. That is amazing faith. And yet, we see that it was not Jesus' will to let the man remain a leper. Praise the Lord. He reaches out, he touches the leper and heals him, saying, "I am willing, be cleansed." And this reveals some really important things about who Jesus is. He is compassionate. He's willing to cross cultural boundaries for the sake of love. That is goodwill for another, even at the cost of your own self. That's love. Goodwill for another person, even at the cost of your own self. That's motivated by an affection toward that person. Why would Jesus reach out and touch him? Because he felt something that we call love that caused him to do something that was within his power to do, to heal the man. And if you have the capability of helping somebody else and you feel that sense of like, I care for them, and you do something about it, that's love. And that's what Jesus did. And he was willing to sacrifice himself in this moment. We know he ultimately went to the true sacrifice, which is giving his entire life on the cross. But Jesus in this moment also demonstrates his willingness to sacrifice something. He would have been considered unclean. But he didn't care about that. He touches the man. Now, what's amazing about that is that Jesus did not become a leper. Any of us would have. We would have touched him and we would have been tainted and perhaps diseased, just as this man. But Jesus' power is of a different sort, and he is not affected by those around him, but he affects everybody around him. And so he touches the man, the power goes out of him, he heals the leper. What amazing power to cure an incurable disease with a touch. And then it also reveals to us about Jesus that he is a man of his word, and he said he is not here to destroy the law and the prophets, but to fulfill them. And we looked last week at kind of what that is. That he tells the man, go show yourselves to the priests as a testimony to them. A testimony of what? A testimony of who Jesus is. That he is not here to destroy the law and the prophets. He's obeying the law by having a leper go to the priests. That's what it says in Leviticus 13 and 14. Jesus was upholding the law of God. And then further than that, he fulfills the law because the old covenant prophets were talking of a day when a Messiah would come and heal people. This is a testimony to them. The Messiah is here. And nobody had ever, as we looked at last week, nobody had ever been cured of leprosy except 2 times, and it was God himself that did it. Who was it this time? God himself. Jesus is a prophet like Moses, just as Moses prayed and Miriam, his sister, was healed of leprosy. Jesus is like that. Jesus is also the true king of Israel, as we looked at in 2 Kings chapter 5, when Naaman the leper was healed, and the king of Israel was called upon, and he said, who am I? God? I can't heal him. Well, there's a true king of Israel who did heal him. And he was God himself, Jesus. And that's the very thing that I think we're supposed to see here. Only God could have done this. Now let's see what where Matthew takes us in the next part of the life of Jesus. Let's read here until verse 17. So Matthew 8, starting in verse 5 through 17. Now when Jesus had entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him pleading with him, saying, Lord, my servant is lying at home paralyzed, dreadfully tormented. And Jesus said to him, I will come and heal him. The centurion answered and said, Lord, I am not worthy that you should come under my roof, but only speak a word and my servant will be healed. For I also am a man under authority, having soldiers under me. And I say to this one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my servant, do this, and he does it. When Jesus heard it, he marveled and said to those who followed, Assuredly, I say to you, I have not found such great faith, not even in Israel. And I say to you that many will come from east and west and sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the sons of the kingdom will be cast out into outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then Jesus said to the centurion, Go your way, and as you have believed, so it will be done for you. And his servant was healed that same hour. Now when Jesus had come into Peter's house, he saw his wife's mother laying sick with a fever. So he touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she arose and served them. When evening had come, they brought to him many who were demon-possessed, and he cast out the spirits with a word, and healed all who were sick, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by Isaiah the prophet, saying, He himself took our infirmities and bore our sicknesses. This is the completion of those 3 miracles that we talked about being in the first section of this chiasm in chapters 8 and chapter 9. 3 miracles, then a teaching about discipleship, 3 miracles, a teaching about discipleship, 3 miracles. This is the first set of 3, and I just wanted to read through the second, the next 2 here to complete that 3. But the main part of this text, even though I went a little further, the main part here is the story of the centurion pleading with Jesus to come heal his servant. There is a lot going on here that should be taken into consideration. And honestly, I think you could turn this into like a 3, 4, if I'm doing it, 10-part series just on the story of the centurion. It's so rich. There's a lot here. We're not going to cover it to that depth because Matthew has a place he's going with all of this, and I don't want to lose that. In fact, this is also recorded in Luke chapter 7, and we're going to look at part of that. But Matthew truncates this story a little bit. He doesn't give us a lot of details because he's trying to point something in particular out. But we're going to look at a little bit of the details. So anyway, there's a lot going on. But first off, let's consider who the centurion is. I think that's really helpful, especially if we're not familiar with Roman era customs and things like that. It's good to know, who is this guy? Because what Jesus said matters in the context of who this man is. He's a Roman Gentile official, military official. He's not Jewish. That's super, super important. He's a Roman Gentile military official. A centurion, as the title would suggest, is in charge of 100 soldiers. Century, 100 years. A cent is 1/100th of a dollar. A centurion is in charge of 100 soldiers. And as I was reading about this to brush up on this, apparently over time it was like they were over 80 soldiers. But the term comes from being in charge of 100. And so he had power by means of Roman citizenship. He was a Roman citizen. He had government authority because he was an official in the military. And in that situation, we can only assume he was not just a mere pauper or beggar. He had some wealth to some degree. So I'm going to at least put it this way. In other words, he's not necessarily the poor in spirit or the afflicted that we looked at in the Beatitudes. He has some power. He has a measure of authority. He has the authority that comes from Rome itself, from the government, from the military, from wealth. He's a Gentile in occupied Jewish territory, so he has some authority even over just regular people. Now, centurions were low-ranking officers. They were like the lowest officer. Think of like a captain in the military today, perhaps. Besides their sword and armor, they also carried with them what was called a vitis, I think is how you pronounce it, vitis, which is a short stick that was used for immediate discipline of their soldiers. In my mind, I wasn't in the military, maybe some of those who were. In my mind, I'm thinking of all the depictions of like a drill sergeant. Like they're there to whip these guys into shape. And so they carried this little stick that if somebody got out of line, like literally got out of line, they would whack them with it and fall in line. Get back in line. So you kind of get the sense that there's not only the authority, but also the means by which they carry out their authority is maybe harsh. Drill sergeants are not intended to be your friend, although maybe you do become their friends, but outside of that context. They're there within the context of their authority to discipline. So, you know how people with just a little bit more authority than the lowest people in maybe your job or maybe the military, I wasn't, again, I have to say this maybe from a distance, but have you ever been in a job where somebody's just like one level above you and they're just a jerk because they think they have like some power over you? It's like, you're just a guy too who's been here longer. But anyway, often people in that situation can let their authority go to their head. And they can begin to be terrible, often brutal leaders. And that's what comes to my mind here of the potential of like a centurion who's the lowest officer in the Roman army, and yet he's over 100 guys. But this guy, he has the backing of the Roman government to operate within with that power over 100 guys. And these soldiers, even them being lower than him, have power over citizens. Remember, Jesus said, and we talked about the Roman custom, that you could cause just any old person to carry your gear for you for at least a mile, according to Roman law. And Jesus said, go with him too. Even just a low soldier has authority and power over just citizens. But what about Jewish citizens? They're even lower yet. And they were treated as lower. Yet, that's not what we see with this centurion. There's something different about him. He's coming to a poor Jewish itinerant teacher and asking him for his help. He's coming to Jesus. What? All right, that's already a reversal. This guy's so different that Jesus praises him. It says he marveled at the man's faith. Jesus marveled? He was amazed. And he did this before an audience of his followers, praising the man and saying, I have not seen this kind of faith, not even in Israel. That's quite a statement coming from Jesus. Now, from this guy's perspective, or just any old Roman centurion's perspective, it's just a poor Jewish teacher. But this man saw something different. And what Jesus said, because of what this guy was unheard of. And it is, once again, just like we saw all throughout the Sermon on the Mount, the opposite of what you would expect. Let's look at what sets this centurion apart. I gave just the most basic brief because I'm not a Roman historian myself, but a brief, this is what a centurion is. But let's look at what makes this guy different. First of all, he cares for his servant instead of treating him like a replaceable piece of equipment. This guy's a slave. We have the word servant because it's maybe easier on our modern ears. I don't know. He's a slave. And the centurion cares about him. Wow, that's amazing. That's in agreement with what Jesus taught in the Sermon on the Mount. That all people have value and they should be treated that way. That you shouldn't use your authority or power to afflict people, but actually care for them. That's what the centurion's doing here. He's seeking care for his slave who's way, way, way below him. And you know what? He's mourning the pain of this servant and seeking the welfare of others and not his own. Wow. It's inspiring. It's like, I want to be like this guy. I don't want to be a centurion, but I want to have that kind of attitude. Luke's account in Luke chapter 7, if you want to flip there, we're going to just look at part of that. But Luke's account in Luke 7 gives us more insight to who this guy is. Luke 7:1 says, Now when Jesus concluded all his sayings in the hearing of the people, he entered Capernaum, and a certain centurion's servant who was dear to him was sick and ready to die. So when he heard about Jesus, he sent elders of the Jews to him, pleading with him to come and heal his servant. And when they came to Jesus, they begged him earnestly, saying that one for whom he should do this was deserving. That's a weird way to say it. The one for whom he should do this was deserving. The centurion was deserving of Jesus to come. For, this is what they said, he loves our nation and has built us a synagogue. Okay, so he's like a nice centurion, it seems. But more than that, his servant was dear to his heart. He cared about him as a person. Then he sends elders of the Jews to Jesus. Why would they do his bidding? Was it because he was an oppressive Roman ruler? low, but still had some authority. Did the elders of the Jews go because they were forced? Apparently not. Because they come to Jesus and they beg him, do what he's asking you to do and heal his servant because he's deserving of your attention. Why? For he loves the Jewish people. And he has built us a synagogue. What? Now, that's crazy. This guy, he's not in the business of building religious meeting houses. He's in the business of war and occupation and control. But he has love for others, and he uses his power not to hurt, but to help. He has spent his own money to build them a synagogue? Wow. This centurion's different. He is apparently living a life of love and using his position of authority to bless rather than to oppress. That is the Sermon on the Mount. This is what Jesus was teaching. Why was he so excited about this man's faith? This is exactly what I was trying to tell you guys. Here's an example of it. So in Matthew 8:7, the centurion pleads for Jesus to come and says, Jesus says to him, I will come and heal him. We've already seen that Jesus has the power to touch someone and heal them of an incurable disease. And so here we go again. He's going to do that. Nope. That's not what happens. The centurion actually says, don't come. He just called for him to come. The centurion stops Jesus from coming. This is sort of a wrench in the story. Why? Wait, what's going on here? He just pleaded with Jesus to come, and now he's saying, stop, don't come? Well, he said that he was not worthy for Jesus to come into his home. I'm not worthy that you come under my roof, he said. Why? Was it because he was a Gentile? Maybe he understood that he'd be putting Jesus in an awkward place because Jesus would likely be considered ceremonially unclean to be there. Now, it was not unlawful for a Jew to go into a Gentile's home. They were just taking a risk. There was nothing in the law that said they could not be in a Gentile's home. But culturally, there was some kind of expectation that you better be careful. Even when another centurion called for Peter to come to Joppa, Cornelius, he was a Gentile, God-fearing man, but not a Jew, and he called for Peter to come, and he even said, we know that it's not lawful for a Jew to come into the house of a Gentile. Peter said that, or Cornelius said that to Peter. We know this. But there isn't actually a law in the Torah or anywhere in the Old Testament that forbids it. It was a cultural misunderstanding, perhaps. But often what would happen is they would follow the traditions of men rather than the commandments of God. And so when the Jews were intended to be a light to the Gentiles, they actually stayed back. We're not going there because then it would defile us. Well, Jesus wasn't like that. He was turning their traditions on the head. So he's like, okay, here I come. The centurion says, no, I'm not worthy that you come under my roof. Maybe he understood this dynamic, knowing the Jewish customs, since he built a synagogue for them and had Jewish friends. And maybe he was considering Jesus. I don't want to put you in that place. We don't know. It doesn't say anything further other than he says, I'm unworthy. But Jesus, he's not stopped by cultural traditions. Remember, he touched a leper. Maybe the centurion felt that his home was not adequate for a king. Maybe he had a higher understanding of who Jesus really was. It doesn't say. But what it does say, for whatever reason, he did not think he nor his home was worthy of Jesus. And he said, only speak a word and my servant will be healed. He didn't say, you think maybe you could speak a word and would something happen if you did? He said, don't come, speak a word, and he will be healed. There's a kind of faith there. There's something he understood in Jesus that others standing around Jesus apparently did not know. And he explained why he believed Jesus could do that in the next verse, verse 9. Matthew 8, verse 9. It says, "For I also am a man under authority, having soldiers under me. And I say to this one, 'Go,' and he goes, and to another, 'Come,' and he comes, and to my servant, 'Do this,' and he does it." He's saying, I get how this hierarchy works. I'm a man under authority. I report to people above me, and I have people under me. I know how this works. And Jesus, I see that you have authority, and if you say, do it, it will happen. I get how this works, and I see that there's authority in you. Say the word, and it will be done. And that is the statement that caused Jesus to marvel. And he said, "Assuredly I say to you, I have not found such great faith even in Israel." The centurion knew something about Jesus that the others had not considered, something he understood because he himself was a man of authority. I get this. I know how this works. And it was becoming known that Jesus had power to heal. He had been doing miracles. He had just, in the narrative we have here, healed the leper. But he also possessed the authority in his word. He could command something to be done, and it would have to be obeyed. That's amazing. This centurion had a measure of authority himself, and he recognized that authority in Jesus. He could call someone to come, and they obeyed him. Jesus could say, "Go do this," and the expectation is that the people would listen and do what he said. Isn't that what Jesus ended the Sermon on the Mount with? This idea, if you hear my words and obey them, this is going to bring life. But if you hear my words and don't obey them, it will bring ruin. This centurion understood it. Did Jesus have power to heal? Yes. Did he have compassion to heal? Yes. Does he have the authority to speak and be obeyed? You bet he does. And that's sometimes where we like to stop. We like to, before that one. I know Jesus is love. He's compassion. He has power. He could touch somebody and they could be healed. That's amazing. I'll pray that he does that for me. And you should pray that he does that for you. But when he says, go, do you go? This is what Matthew's highlighting here. He has not only power and love, but authority. And even sickness must obey him. In Isaiah 55, all throughout Isaiah, it's prophesying of the Messiah coming. What is he going to be like? Isaiah 55:11. So shall my word that goes forth from my mouth be obeyed. It shall not return to me void, but it shall accomplish what I please, and it shall prosper in the thing for which I sent it. We like to quote this verse in terms of the everlasting nature of the Scriptures, which is fine. But what it is talking about is that when God says something, it happens. When he promises a Messiah that's going to come, he delivers on that promise, and he comes. And when he says, all authority has been given unto me, go, make disciples, do this, love your neighbor as yourself, even love your enemies, he's saying, this must be obeyed. This is the proper thing. When I speak, it is done. And yet we have a will. We have our own will. We can choose to align with God's will or not. And he's calling us to align with his will. And Jesus is God, and at his word, everyone will submit. But just as we see in the character of this centurion, we see more so in Jesus. He's not some kind of brute that wants to smite you. He's the creator of your soul, and he wants to save you from death. And he knows this is the way you will live. I created you for life. I want you to abound in life and goodness and fruitfulness. But the way you're going is bringing death and destruction. Listen to me. Listen to me and do what I say, and it will bring life. To disobey him is to reject life, because he's the source of it. Now, this is the twisted thing. The twisted thing is that the enemy of our souls has convinced us, in general, maybe not us individually, because we obey Jesus, right? Amen? But he has convinced humanity that God's authority is not valid, and it causes us to take that authority upon ourselves and make our own way. The truth is that his way is the only way that leads to life. Don't listen to the enemy. And you must learn from him and follow his leading in order to live. That's not a God that brings rules. That's a God that says, listen, if you go there, you're going to die. I don't want you to die. Stay here. This is the narrow path, and it's hard. I know it's hard. But enter through Jesus, walk with Jesus, and come to Jesus by walking the narrow path. Because if you go any other way, it's surely going to lead to destruction. Listen, guys, listen. God is pleading with us. Don't reject my words. But we have a problem with authority in our generation, more so than in prior generations in our own culture. Our collective culture tells us that we don't need to listen to anyone else. We are our own person. You know what? You are your own person in that you are accountable for your actions. But we have this idea that, who are you to tell me what to do? Children don't obey parents. What does the scripture say? Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. It's the opposite. Our culture says, you don't have to listen to them. You don't have to wash the dishes. You don't have to take the trash out. You don't have to stop calling your sister stinky sock. What Pastor Jim teaches over and over and over is in alignment with this principle. There are authorities in our lives, and God has put them there for a reason. But our culture says, don't obey. And you know what? Where are the kids learning this? From parents who don't obey authority over them. Guess what? You're not your own person apart from the fact that you're part of what God has created. Yes, you're your own person in that you will be held accountable. But you know what? There are laws. And there are others in your life that you should listen to. That's called wisdom. But that you must listen to because it's right. And you know, those people who make the laws, a lot of times they don't listen to them either. Our government officials don't even obey the law, nor do they obey the will of the people because they don't believe they're accountable to anybody. There's no authority over me. But where does the authority that they have even come from? In America, it comes from the will of the people, right? But where does that come from? God. And we have all these jurisdictions of authority that exist, and it ultimately leads all the way to God himself. And when you reject the authority that God has placed over you, you're rejecting God. Because why? We're generally selfish and self-seeking. We don't care. We want ours, and we want it now. But that always comes at the cost of someone else. And when we seek our own way, it hurts people. It breaks trust. It actually costs money or possessions. Things are broken. Whatever it is, it comes at a cost. It can literally injure a person when you don't obey. But people who listen to the words of Jesus take this into consideration, and they listen to him and they say, you know what? This person matters more than what I want. And in a sort of reversal of human nature and the fall and the way of this world, when we love people, it actually fills us up. And we're more fulfilled than if we sought things on our own. And that's why Jesus was so amazed by the faith of this Gentile Roman military officer. He's got all the strikes against him culturally as far as like being somebody who would listen and obey the God of the universe. He's all the wrong things according to Jewish culture at the time. But he's all the right things according to faith in Jesus Christ. He understood the authority and character of Jesus. He's a good king. He wants good for us, and it's good that we obey him. And he submitted to the will of God in the loving care for a peasant servant. That's like doing what Jesus said to do. He submitted to the will of God in love for people. For in occupied territory, saying, I'm going to bless the people that my government is oppressing. I'm going to build them a synagogue where they can worship their God. And I'm going to befriend them. It says first in Luke's account that he sent Jewish elders, and then it calls them friends later. They were his friends. He obeyed the authority of God in the love of God itself. Not because of some religious rituals. He was completely removed from those things. It was the heart of Christ. And this is why Jesus marveled. Jesus continues with a brief teaching right after this. He's like, oh, but got guys standing here. They encountered this moment with me, this centurion. Wow, what faith. So he teaches something, and this is really important to see in verse 11. Matthew 8, verse 11. This brief teaching about what is God's heart for the whole earth. Jesus says, and I say to you that many will come from east and west and sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. Who are his kingdom people? He just taught about that in the Sermon on the Mount. He says, but the sons of the kingdom will be cast out into outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Wow. He's talking about this centurion being a Gentile and not being part of the family of Abraham in the literal sense. He's not ethnically Jewish. He's not from the line of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, except in the most important way he is. He has the faith of Abraham. And Jesus says there are people that are going to come from outside of Israel, from the east and from the west, and they're going to be the ones who are sitting in the kingdom. But there will be those who are literally the sons of Abraham in the flesh, and they're going to be cast into outer darkness because you come in by faith. John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave, God so loved the entire world, let's just point that out, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believed in him would not perish but have everlasting life. For God did not send his Son into this world to condemn the world. It wasn't his heart to condemn the world, but to save them. What is the condemnation? It goes on to say, what brings condemnation on somebody? They love darkness rather than the light because their deeds were evil. It has nothing to do with your ethnicity, has nothing to do with your religion. It has to do with whether or not you have faith in Jesus and obey his word. But if you love darkness rather than light, you're not going to be one of his kingdom people. It was always God's heart to redeem the entire world. All peoples of all nations would be saved if they come to him. In Isaiah 45, verse 22, it says, "Look to me and be saved, all you ends of the earth, for I am God and there is no other. I have sworn by myself, the word has gone out of my mouth. I have said this in righteousness, and it shall not return, that to me every knee shall bow, and every tongue shall take an oath." I hope that sounds familiar to you, because that's what Paul quoted in Romans 14. Every knee shall bow, and every tongue confess that Jesus is Lord, Master, the one to be obeyed. He's saying that every person will give an account to God himself. But his plan is for all to come by faith and live. And the question is, have you obeyed his voice? Are you obeying his voice? Are you doing his will, regardless of your age, your race, your culture, your social status? Have you built your house upon the rock and obeyed his teachings? Do you love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself, even if your neighbor's your enemy? What a great example of this. But the centurion isn't the focus of this. The focus is Jesus. But it's highlighting this man in a way to say, you know what? Maybe we should all recognize the authority of Jesus in our lives. That's the kind of faith that we should have, because that's the kind of faith that is warranted for the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Do we live like this man, recognizing the authority of Jesus in our lives? Don't let the world tell you what to do, just as Pastor Jim has been reminding all of us, that our minds must be transformed, and they have to be conformed to God's will. He was different, but he knew Jesus was different. And I want to take a brief moment, because we read the rest, and just by way of concluding this morning, we read the rest of this. The next part is about Peter's mother-in-law being sick with a fever. This is recorded in both Mark and Luke as well. But Matthew puts that story here almost as a side note. There's barely anything given, but I think it's really important what he's pointing out here by including that next little story in this triplet of 3 miracles. We have the leper, we have the centurion's servant, and then we have Peter's mother-in-law. Now, if you're thinking in terms of a chiasm, and I hope you are to some degree, because in Matthew, you should be. In this little set of 3, there's one in the middle that's like really important, but there's 2 on the sides that highlight the importance of the one in the middle. And Jesus touched the leper and healed him. And Jesus touched Peter's mother-in-law and healed her. But all he did was say a word and healed the centurion's servant. We're supposed to be dwelling on that kind of authority, that kind of power, in terms of not just sheer power, but in the authority that he has, that when he says something, it is done. And then, in case we missed it, he says in verse 16, when evening had come, they brought to him many who were demon-possessed, and he cast out the spirits with a word and healed all who were sick, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophet Isaiah, saying, he took our infirmities and bore our sicknesses, which is a quote from Isaiah 53:4. Just with a word. Because God said this would happen, it happened. And he keeps his word. The understanding of the authority of Jesus continues to compound as we look through the rest of these 2 chapters. The question is, do you acknowledge it in your own life? And if we're honest with ourselves, I think we would probably say, not enough. Let's pray. Father, I ask that you would just continue to pour out your goodness upon us, because we know that that's who you are, and we can confidently ask for that. Lord, have mercy. Many times we have strayed from your truth. We have not walked in your ways. We have known what you have said and not done it. Father, forgive us. Help us as we continue through this study and as we read your word on our own throughout the week. Help us to see you for who you really are in our lives. You are merciful. You are kind. You are loving. But you are also our master. And I pray that you would just lead us to a deeper understanding of what that looks like. Help us to see areas in our lives where we have not opened up and let your light shine into the darkness of our hearts. Lord, I know I don't want to be the type of person that's condemned because I love darkness rather than the light. I love Jesus, who is the light of men. And I pray that you would just continually renew us day by day by shining the light of your glory on us, that we would know and we would take to heart your teachings, that we would walk in your ways, and that when people see us, they would see you in us. And I just pray a blessing over everyone here and everyone who's part of this fellowship who's not here today, Lord, that we would truly embrace this in the deepest way possible in our lives, and that we would go and do as you have done. In Jesus' name, amen.